Why was the lawyer one of the most hated and disrespected figures in Chinese history? In the modern world, we see the courtroom as a stage for justice. We might think of the lawyer as a protector of rights, someone who helps us navigate disputes we can't resolve on our own. But for most of Chinese history, the person who helped you win a court case was seen as a drain on society. Hi everyone, I'm Amy. For over 2,000 years, the lawyers of China were in kind of a gray area. They were looked down upon, but also necessary. Today, let's look at how the system of lawyers worked in Chinese history. In Chinese today, the word for lawyer is 律师, which basically means master of the law, someone who was expected to understand the principles and purpose of the law itself. But for most of Chinese history, that's not how lawyers were referred to at all. Instead, they were known as 讼师, which meant master of litigation. Technically, they were not lawyers in the exact same way that we might think of lawyers today. But they were the closest thing. They were someone who prepared your legal documents and shaped your arguments for court. Someone who understood how to win a court fight. But they did not argue your case for you in court. In ancient China, when you appeared before a magistrate, you appeared alone. There was no one to speak for you in that room. A 讼师 could not walk into a courtroom and argue your case. What they could do was prepare everything beforehand. Listen to your situation, find the strongest angle, and put it all into a written petition that you would carry in yourself. And they were also someone whose job depended entirely on other people having conflicts. Even in the Qing Dynasty, the last imperial dynasty, 讼师 were still extremely looked down upon by government officials, who would often call them something even more blunt, a 讼棍, which means litigation stick or thug. A stick used to stir up trouble, a thug for beating the innocent, a troublemaker. So what's up with this negativity? It had a lot to do with the philosophy of Confucianism. For example, Confucius said, "I am no better than anyone else at resolving conflicts or handling disputes. Instead, we need to create a society where there are no conflicts or disputes." Confucius may have been an idealist, but he believed that fundamentally every single person was capable of goodness. In his view, a truly great ruler or leader would set a good example and educate his people well enough to live in harmony. He argued that if a person only followed the law to avoid punishment, then that is only governance of outward behavior and not virtue of the inner heart. Instead, if a person was benevolent and followed propriety, then they wouldn't even think of committing a crime or causing discord in the first place. In a perfect Confucian world, the ideal was no litigation. Disputes were supposed to be settled by family elders or through quiet moral reflection. Taking someone to court was a public admission of failure. It meant you had failed to be a filial son or a harmonious neighbor. It was a massive loss of face for everyone involved. So when a 讼师 stepped in to help you, they weren't seen as a hero of justice. They were seen as someone who was promoting discord and conflict instead of allowing the restoration of harmony. They were the ones who whispered in your ear, convinced you not to settle, and dragged a private shame into the public eye of the magistrate. The Qing Dynasty official Wang Fengshen once wrote that litigation masters manipulate ignorant villagers, stirring up disputes and twisting right and wrong. They make people unwilling to end their lawsuits, bringing harm to both parties just to feed greedy clerks. This is most detestable. Throughout Chinese history, the rules changed, the procedures changed, and society changed. But the underlying purpose of law remained mostly the same. It was less to protect individual rights and more to preserve order, hierarchy, and the authority of the state. Long before lawyers were recognized as a formal profession, there was Deng Xi, who is often referred to today as the ancestor of lawyers in China. Deng Xi was born around 545 BCE in a state of Zhen during the late spring and autumn period of the Zhou dynasty. it was a time when laws were generally kept secret from the people. There was a saying that if the people know the law, they lose their fear of their superiors. With the laws kept secret, rulers and noble families had wide discretion in how they applied punishments. And as the central governing power of the Zhou dynasty gradually fragmented across competing states, many officials and noble ruling families started to change the rules, or even make up their own laws, in order to suit their needs. If you were a commoner, you didn't know the law, you just waited to be punished by it. The prime minister of Zhen, Zichan, wanted to change all of that. But it wasn't necessarily for the sake of the people. Instead, he believed that in order for the government to run effectively, the law had to be clear, and everyone had to follow the same laws. He wanted the people to know the law so that punishments were clear and consistently applied. In 536 BCE, Zichan made the laws public by carving them onto large bronze tripods and placed them in public areas in the capital. But this didn't fully solve the problem of secrecy because of location and literacy. Most of the population did not live near the capital and had no way to reach the bronze tripods. And most of the people couldn't read it anyways, even if they were nearby. Zichan made the law visible, but it was still not really accessible. And this is where Deng Xi made his revolutionary contribution. He brought the laws to the people. According to later anecdotes, Deng Xi carved the laws of the state onto portable bamboo slips, creating the Zhu Xing, the bamboo code. Some stories suggest that the bamboo code was a direct copy of what was carved onto the bronze tripods. Other stories say that Deng Xi added his own interpretations into the bamboo code, making it easier to understand. In either case, the law was no longer fixed in place in the capital. It could now travel through the kingdom and reach far more people who wanted to learn it. And Deng Xi was the first man to sell it. But just knowing the law was not the same as being able to use it to your advantage. So he began taking private clients, turning his legal knowledge into a service for hire. According to the annals of the master Lu, those who wished to learn the art of arguing disputes brought him a coat as a gift for a major case, and a shirt or pants for a minor one. The people who flocked to him were beyond count. But it wasn't just that he knew the rules, it was how he twisted them. Deng Xi was a key figure in the establishment of a new school of thought known as the Mingjia, the school of names. He believed that language was fundamentally flexible. If you changed the name of a crime or reinterpreted a single word, you could change the reality of the punishment. His style of argument suggested that the truth is just a matter of how you define your terms. His opponents claimed that he was so effective at finding loopholes that he could win any argument, regardless of the facts. It was said that he took the wrong as right, and the right as wrong. Right and wrong had no fixed measure, and what was possible or impossible changed by the day. Those he wished to win won. Those who wished to find guilty were found guilty. To the government officials, Deng Xi was a nightmare. If the law is just a language game, a ruler's moral authority disappears. If right and wrong are just a series of shifting definitions, then a ruler is no longer a moral leader. They're just another player in a game of words. If anyone could just pay to have their crimes argued away, then the law meant nothing. And beyond the law, it also meant that Deng Xi didn't care about justice. He only cared about the outcome that his client paid for. In 501 BCE, the state finally had enough. Deng Xi was arrested and executed. His crimes were allegedly disturbing the government and spreading false doctrines. Ironically, after Deng Xi's death, the government didn't throw away his work. Instead, they supposedly adopted his bamboo code as an official record of the state's law. They killed the lawyer, but they kept his codes. The execution of Deng Xi would begin a pattern that would last for the next 2,000 years. You are allowed to know the law. You are even allowed to share it. But the moment you challenge the state's interpretation of the law, then you become the enemy. After After the death of Deng Xi, the Songshi didn't vanish. They simply became less visible. His disciples and others like them continued doing what he had done, helping ordinary people navigate a legal system that was never designed for them. But the government still didn't like them. So they had to become more discreet. They met clients in private, and they largely stayed out of the spotlight for the next 1,000 years. In fact, the official histories of the next several dynasties basically did not record much about Songshi at all. So who were these people? And why would anyone choose a profession that was looked down upon, legally risky, and socially disreputable? Through the early dynasties, government positions were largely controlled by powerful noble families. If your family wasn't connected to one of them, there was basically no chance of you getting a government job, no matter how educated or capable you were. This meant that many lower-class but literate scholars who may have had knowledge and expertise had no place to use their skills. And then in the late 6th century, during the Sui dynasty, Emperor Wen wanted to weaken the monopoly on government positions by the noble families and established a formal standardized testing system known as the imperial examination, the Keju. The imperial exams would open a new path for lower-class scholars to government positions. Studied Confucian classics, pass the exams, become a government official. That became the dream of many common people. But generally speaking, the amount of available government positions was still much less than the amount of people who wanted those jobs. And that gap would only continue to widen as more and more people would try to pass the imperial exams as their chance to greatness. This meant that only around 1 to 2% of candidates would pass each imperial exam. For every scholar who made it into government, there were hundreds more who had spent years, sometimes decades, studying and had nothing to show for it. These men were educated, literate, and deeply familiar with official texts and the workings of the state. But without an official position, they had no clear place in society. So, what could all of these educated but jobless scholars do? Some became teachers, some became scribes, and some became songshi. These jobless scholars knew how to read complex texts, how to write with precision and logic, and how the government actually worked. These were exactly the skills needed to write a compelling petition, spot a weakness in an opponent's case, or figure out which law a magistrate might be sympathetic to. The knowledge that was supposed to get them into the government ended up being used against it. In the Tang Dynasty, nearly 1,000 years after Deng Xi, these petition writers had become too visible to ignore. The problem, from the government's perspective, was not just that the songshi existed. It was that some of them were embellishing their clients' cases, adding dramatic details, exaggerating grievances, doing whatever it took to make a weak case look strong. Magistrates were being manipulated by petitions that painted ordinary disputes as grave injustice, and the government had had enough. So, a law was passed to punish exaggeration and false details. According to the legal code of the Tang Dynasty, for those who write petitions for others and add or increase the severity of the charges beyond the facts, if the added details lead to a heavier punishment, the writer shall be punished by 1 degree less than the penalty for a false accusation. At the very least, they shall receive 50 lashes. Don't embellish in your petitions. Sounds reasonable and fair, right? Unfortunately, in practice, this law could turn into a liability trap. Real grievances are rarely clean and tidy. A peasant who lost his land to a corrupt landlord doesn't have a paper trail. He has a strong story. And the moment a petition writer tried to put that story into words that actually conveyed the injustice of it, they were taking a legal risk. Any detail that couldn't be proven in court, no matter how true it felt, was potential grounds for punishment. The law didn't just target liars, it targeted anyone who tried to make a human case out of a human situation. On top of that, magistrates would repeatedly question petitioners before even looking at their paperwork, each time spelling out in detail exactly what would happen to them if anything in their petition turned out to be false or exaggerated. Imagine you're a peasant who has hired someone to write your case. Before the magistrate reads a single word, he calls you in and explains, in terrifying detail, the consequences if anything in your petition can't be proven. He does this more than once, on separate days. If your story changed by a single word across those sessions, if you flinched at all, you and your 讼师 were headed for the whipping post. It was an effective deterrent. By making it risky to use a 讼师, the government hoped that people would simply show up before the magistrate and state their case plainly, without professional help. No embellishment, no strategy, just the facts, as the commoner understood them. But the Song dynasty introduced a new problem that the Tang dynasty solution was never designed to handle. As the economy expanded, so did the disputes. Trade, property, and debt conflicts were growing faster than the old system could handle. Especially in the prosperous southern regions, people needed legal paperwork just to conduct basic business. This wasn't about grievances or manipulation anymore. It was about commerce. And the government finally had to accept that legal document writing wasn't going away, and decided to try to control it instead. The state began to recognize and regulate writing shops known as 书铺. These were official licensed stores, where anyone could pay a professional to write their deeds or formal petitions. But there was a strict condition. These shops were only permitted to write down exactly what the clients told them. They were forbidden from offering any legal strategy or advice whatsoever. But the door had been opened, and where there is a will, there is always a way. So while these writing shops couldn't officially offer legal advice, people could still get the help they needed through unofficial channels, such as tea houses or back alleys. By the Ming Dynasty, the 讼师 had become a fact of life. This is when we even start to see underground manuals circulating widely among those who made a living helping people with their cases. These manuals were guides to petition writing. They taught how to craft a formal petition with language so vivid, so heartbreaking, or so infuriating that the magistrate would be emotionally moved before he had even finished reading. They used elaborate phrases and dramatic comparisons, capable of transforming a common land dispute into something that read like a cosmic injustice. The state repeatedly tried to ban these manuals, but as with everything else they had tried, it didn't work. Publishers kept printing them in large quantities well into the Qing Dynasty. And as China moved into that final dynasty, the government was about to try one last time to bring the 讼师 under control. By the time the Qing Dynasty took power in 1644, the 讼师 had become an unavoidable reality of Chinese legal life. The state had spent centuries trying to suppress them, but the demand for their help only grew. In the 18th century, the government decided to try a different tactic. Instead of banning petition writers, they would control who was allowed to be one. The government established a system called the 官代书, the official licensed writers. To become one, you had to pass a government examination, proving you were honest and literate. Once certified, these men were the only ones legally permitted to write petitions for the public. According to the statutes and ordinances of the Great Qing, in all criminal courts, officials must select from the local people those who are honest and literate to be tested and recruited as official licensed writers. Whenever there is a petition, they shall be ordered to write it according to the person's actual situation and facts. And magistrates generally required petitions to carry the official stamp of a 官代书. Without that stamp, your petition was often thrown out before anyone read a word. On paper, this looked like progress. But by giving certified writers the exclusive right to stamp petitions, the government had effectively handed them a monopoly. The official Huang Liuhong warned about this by saying that those recruited as official writers may come to rely on their government certification to engage in arbitrary extortion or delay and refuse to write petitions without reason. Measures must be taken early to strictly prevent this. His prediction came true. Instead of helping the poor, many licensed writers became corrupt gatekeepers. They charged stamp fees that were far above the legal rate. If you couldn't pay, they simply refused to write or stamp your case. By the mid-19th century, many people were simply too poor to afford the official stamp. In certain county records, historians have found petitions with handwritten notes that basically said, "Too poor to pay for the stamp. Please show mercy and read this anyway." The official licensed writers had the stamp, but that was all they had. They were either too expensive for most people to afford or too cautious to write anything that might backfire on them. A stamp on a bland, safe petition wasn't always much use to someone with a real grievance. So, the unofficial 讼师 never truly went away. They simply adapted. A 讼师would sit in a private room, hidden from official view, and listen to a client's story. He would then write a draft using every technique in his manual to make the case as compelling as possible. The client would take that draft to the official licensed writer, pay for the stamp, and submit it to the court as his own words. The 讼师 was legally non-existent. Yet, he was the one writing every word the magistrate actually read. They worked in secret, took no credit, and left no name behind. They proved that in the system where the government held all the cards, a single person with enough wit could still find a way to win. To the people, they were legends, but to the government officials, they were troublemakers no better than common criminals, responsible for the massive backlog of cases clogging the courts. The Qin Dynasty writer Ling Shu criticized China's legal culture at the time by saying, "China has no masters of law, only masters of litigation. No detectives, only constables. The litigation masters are like flies, and the constables are like wolves. Wherever the flies go, the good meat is spoiled. Wherever the wolves pass, no livestock is spared." And even anecdotal stories describe 讼师 in a negative way, saying that the 讼师 was insidious and full of schemes. In any lawsuit that others could not win, he would surely come up with a strange strategy to prevail. The 讼师 may have been essential to the people, but they were never recognized as legitimate. As the Qing dynasty began to crumble under the pressure of foreign powers and internal rebellion, the world of the 讼师 was approaching its end. In 1912, the new Republic of China officially abolished the old 讼师 system and replaced it with the modern-day lawyer. For the first time in Chinese history, the lawyer was a recognized, legitimate legal profession. But the legacy of men like Deng Xi remains. They were the ones who taught the people that the law was not just a tool for punishment. The story of the 讼师 is a reminder that knowing the law and being able to use it are two very different things. They were hated not because they were always evil, but because their existence was inconvenient. Every person who sought out a 讼师 was proof that the state's ideal of harmony wasn't working. The government preached no litigation, but the demand for legal help never stopped growing. Even today, lawyers are often seen as people who profit from other people's disputes, who help the guilty escape justice, and who take simple problems and make them complicated. The names have changed, but the instinct to distrust the person who speaks for the accused is still the same. But without someone who understands the law, most ordinary people would have no way to navigate the legal system, whether we like it or not. Conflicts are part of life. And as long as there are disputes, there will always be a need for someone who knows how to resolve them. Wouldn't it be nice if Confucius' ideal was actually possible, and we could live in a world of harmony without disputes or conflict? But other philosophers did not always agree. The Chinese philosopher Qin Zi said that human nature is evil, being good is simply an act. And the English philosopher Thomas Hobbes argued that without laws and order, The natural state of humanity is simply every person at war with every other person. So, is a world of harmony possible? Or is human nature just inherently bad and conflict inevitable, making lawyers necessary? What do you think? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed today's topic, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
Stay curious, stay magical.